the amount the ABC is getting in the budget is increasing, but it's well below inflation over that period. Is that accurate?
Well, the ABC has strong and growing funding, over $1 billion a year. The ABC has funding over a 3-year period, what's called a triennium, running from 1 July 2019 to 30 June 2022. So ABC funding is increasing. Now, in 2018, we did say there would be a pause in the indexation for inflation, and a lot of ABC journalists and Labor politicians have quoted the May 2018 budget papers on that point. What none of them have quoted is the April 2019 budget papers, which added $43.7 million of funding to the ABC for that 3-year triennium. And you need to look at the combined impact of both measures. As a consequence of those, the ABC's funding is growing every year over that 3-year period. Now, you referenced this promise that Anthony Albanese has made. It's a meaningless promise. It's a non-promise because it relates to a funding period from 1 July 2019 to 30 June 2022. Now, Mr Albanese is, even if he wins the next election, that's likely not going to be until towards the middle of 2022. So he's making a meaningless non-promise to deliver increased funding over a time period that will be almost complete by the time that he would come to government in that scenario. Now, of course, there's a real question as whether he's even going to be around by then, but that's another matter. But the point I make is ABC has strong, secure funding going up every year over the current 3-year period. And to understand the full impact of the funding, you need to look not just at the May 2018 budget papers, but also the April 2019 budget papers.
Yeah, so the increase in recent years has been more on the back of that indexation pause. I understand that, but still the increases they're getting at the moment are less than inflation.
Well, the impact of an indexation pause is just that, but then we've added additional funding on top of that. Can I also make the point, something else that Labor members have failed to point out, unsurprisingly, that very same budget paper, May 2018, made the point that the ABC is not subject to the efficiency dividend. Now, the efficiency dividend is what applies to almost every government organisation, which is a percentage reduction in funding each year to encourage organisations to find efficiencies. And organisations as diverse as the Australian Federal Police and ASIO are subject to the efficiency dividend. The ABC is not subject to the efficiency dividend. And as I've mentioned, we provided additional funding to the ABC last year, $43.7 million for regional and local news gathering. So look, there has been a lot of commentary about ABC funding over the last week or so. It is important to have the facts, have the context. Now, I was on Q&A with Bill Shorten on Monday night. He quoted the May 2018 budget papers, failed to mention the April 2019 budget paper. Unclear whether he was being tricky or whether he was just lazy and hadn't realised that you needed to look at the next budget paper as well. But we have seen, I'm sorry to say, some quite misleading statements from Labor on this matter. The facts are the ABC has secure and growing funding over the current 3-year triennium.
Growing, but again, just this question on inflation, because we've seen decisions made by the ABC that have had job cuts, ABC Lifestyle gone, the 7:45am radio bulletin. I mean, this is evidence that they've got less in real terms because of inflation than they did before. And that's
just to explain the context, so the ABC has operational, editorial, financial independence. So they're provided with funding, substantial and growing funding. It's for ABC board and management to decide how they allocate that funding and what decisions they make. Now, last week the ABC put out its 5-year strategic plan, and that came along with a number of decisions that were announced. Now, I've welcomed aspects of the strategic plan. They've committed that 75% of ABC staff will be outside of the ABC's headquarters in Ultimo. Now, I welcome that because Sydney is not Australia, Ultimo is not Sydney. The ABC needs to reflect the views of all Australians and meet the needs of all Australians. So it is appropriate.
Yeah, so just on the funding aspect too, because Scott Morrison said there's no better place to be a journalist than the ABC, and you know the media landscape is a pretty fraught one. Certainly within all organisations, Sky News and the ONET News Corp as well. So is that part of the important message? You've got to say, look, it might not seem as generous as it was previously, but that's the context this is all in?
It's a very tough time to be in the media business. Many media organisations are facing revenue drops of 20 or 30% or more on revenue at the same point last year because COVID-19 has meant that advertising revenues have fallen very sharply. We've seen newspapers in regional parts of the country having their operations suspended, in some cases going permanently to a digital-only mode of operation. We know that some of our major media companies, some of our major broadcasters are relying on JobKeeper. Against that backdrop, the ABC, with secure and growing funding, is in many ways, in relative terms, pretty fortunate. Now, the ABC is well funded because it does important work. Our government strongly backs the ABC. That's why we provide that stable and growing funding. But at the same time, as you yourself point out, Tom, and you've seen it and many other journalists have seen it, these are tough times in the media industry, and in many organisations, sadly, we've seen significant numbers of redundancies and reductions in activity.
Public interest news gathering grants have been announced. The interesting aspect of this for some is that no first-time publishers were eligible, even though there's sort of a lot of state of flux in media, some new ideas popping up. Why were first-time publishers excluded?
So our public interest news gathering program, it's a $50 million program. We announced it in April as part of the response to the COVID-19 downturn, but we arrived at the $50 million figure based upon advice from the ACCC, one of its recommendations in last year's Digital Platforms Review. So it's funding available to regional broadcasters, television and radio, and regional newspaper publishers. That money has now been allocated. We announced that over the weekend. And so there's $20 million going to regional television broadcasters, $18 million to regional newspapers, over 90 regional newspaper publishers, and $12 million to radio. Now, what that means is we're seeing newspapers in country towns recommencing print publication in a number of locations. That's a very welcome development. There is no doubt that local news is important to local communities, and all the more so in regional communities. Some of these newspaper publishers have been serving their communities for 50 or 100 years. And so it's a tough time in media, it's a tough time in regional media. Our public interest news gathering program is there to support organisations with a proven track record, to answer your question, a proven track record of providing news. And what we want to do is maintain and, where possible, increase the amount of news that those organisations are providing.
Just finally on Woolworths, hit with a hefty fine over spam emails and texts as well. The company says part of this issue was you can have a household signed up to get these alerts. There might be, say, 3 different people signed up to the one email address. One person opts out, but the email still gets sent out. Do you have some sympathy there? I mean, maybe the other people on the account want to know whether moisturiser is half price that week or whatever it might be. What's the company supposed to do in that situation?
The Spam Act is very clear that businesses are not permitted to send marketing emails or texts if the owner or the holder of the account, the email address or the mobile phone number, has opted out, has ticked the box to say no sales and marketing communications. Now, Woolworths is a very large, well-resourced company. It's got an expert IT department. It's got the capability to follow the rules, and this is about sending a clear message to Australian business. Spam is against the law. The Australian Communications and Media Authority is following this. We had a number of complaints from consumers after Woolworths sent more than 5 million spam emails over nearly a 3-year period. And that's what's resulted in this investigation and this substantial fine. The message is very clear.
Yeah, and look, personally, it drives me mad, but I'm just wondering what a company's supposed to do if multiple accounts are signed up to one email, for example, and one person opts out and the other...
What they're supposed to do is comply with the law. And for large companies, small companies, we expect you to comply with the law.
What does that mean?
If people have consented to receive marketing emails...
the alerts on the same email and one person on the same email...
the law's clear. If there's been an opt-out from somebody on that email address, that's what you need to honour.
Right, so one person opting out means no emails are sent out?
If there's a customer account associated with an email address and there's been an opt-out, then that's what the company needs to honour. That's the law. We expect large companies like Woolworths to know what the law is and to comply with it.